Picture this: you are set in a world where you can't make a sound. You can't talk, can't sing, can't even listen to music or a podcast you love because any noise could mean life or death for your loved ones and you. This is a setup for the 2018 sci fi horror thriller that silenced the world called A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place was John Krasinski's debut film, and boy, was it a pleasant surprise. With a runtime of 90 minutes, who would have thought the awkward guy from The Office could not only direct but star as a leading man? Now, before we get into it, please hit that like and subscribe button. I drop horror reviews and breakdowns throughout the channel. I also do a segment every Tuesday on news in the horror genre, so please come along for the ride. And if you'd like to support the channel, there is a link in my description where you can buy me a cup of coffee. Now, for this video, we're only going to be talking about the first movie in what will soon be a trilogy. So let's get into talking about A Quiet Place. And also, fair warning, light spoilers ahead, and I'll give a big spoiler warning for the climax. So let's get into A Quiet Place. Quiet Place is set in a post-apocalyptic world. You are introduced to the Abbott family, Mother Evelyn, played by Emily Blunt, Father Lee, played by John Krasinski himself, and their deaf daughter, Reagan, played by, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher this name, Millicent Simmonds, who's actually deaf in real life. Krasinski said he sought out a deaf actress, and quote, "For many reasons, I didn't want a non-deaf actress pretending to be deaf. A deaf actress would help with my knowledge and my understanding of the situation tenfold. I wanted someone who lives in it and who could teach me about it on set." We also have Marcus, played by Noah Jupe, and Bo, played by Cade Woodward. The setting is perfect and uneasy right off the bat. You watch as this family goes into a nearby drugstore that reminds me of the toilet paper craze in 2020, communicating via sign language. On my first watch, I actually didn't notice that while supplies seemed short, things like bags of chips and candy were still there. And knowing what I do now about this movie, that would make total sense. You obviously don't want to create noise by opening a bag of crispy chips in the middle of the forest. You might become somebody's meal. One of the best elements of this movie is the sound use or lack of, especially when you're getting it from the point of view of Reagan, since she is deaf. You basically don't hear anything. And you watch this family be as cautious and quiet as possible, and not to the level that we're used to. I think it's a level that has deep concentration, and frankly, I would have probably been taken out within day one. Uh, Everything you'll see is detailed, especially as you watch Evelyn try to grab a bottle of medicine that is turned on its side, being very cautious not to knock down the other bottles around. Now, this leads us into one of the most heartbreaking openings, which is set up as the youngest, Bo, is very curious about a rocket ship he found. Family takes it away from him, telling him it's going to be too loud, removing the batteries from it. And then Reagan, his older sister, gives it back to him without the batteries in it, almost as it's their little secret. I'm sure, as any curious 4-year-old, we watch as he grabs the batteries and then follows his family on the sand-like path that they have created to dull their footsteps. Which, by the way, they do pretty much, if I can recall, everything barefoot in this movie. Uh, Again, to dull the footsteps or, squeaker noise from your sneakers. Everybody's been there. Don't tell me you haven't. Now, this leads to Bo putting the batteries back into the rocket ship and it starts going off. And I remember gripping the arms of my seat in the first watch of this in the theaters as you watch Lee run as fast as possible to try to reach his son, to outrun this creature you see on the sidelines coming through. But unfortunately, the creature grabs Bo, and I remember watching it. What an opening. I think the entire theater gasped with me. It still sends shivers down my spine when I watch it over again with my second watch and third watch and fourth watch. Basically, anytime this opening is on, I have shivers down. And as a rewatch, I've noticed something new. Evelyn is trying not to scream. She has her hands over her mouth, Lee as well, not to bring attention to the rest of their family. And I can't imagine going through that, watching your youngest being taken from you, and potentially killed right in front of you, and not being able to scream or call out to him because you can't make noise because you risk losing the other two. Fast forward 472 days later, the Abbotts are surviving in the soundless world on an isolated farm. Lee is focusing on trying to reach anyone with a radio he has made shift together, and research he has put together on the creatures, trying to find their weakness. Evelyn is pregnant, preparing to bring a child into this world, and Reagan is dealing with the guilt of her brother's death, as she feels she has caused it by giving him a toy, almost as giving him a sense of normality in that moment. The family has built an underground shelter for Evelyn to give birth in, and a soundproof padded box with a oxygen tank mask attached to keep the baby quiet once it is born, as to not alert the monsters that are set in the world. There's a sense of normality, if you can call that, for the Abbotts. They grow their own food, they go fishing, they play games, board games at night after dinner, with the intent of trying to make no noise whatsoever. The performances here for each of these characters is fantastic. There's really a chemistry there that makes you feel as if they are a family set in a world that they only have each other. Relationships here are so well developed, with themes of love and loss and survival powerfully conveyed through each of them. Now, there's an intense scene where the kids accidentally knock over a lamp while playing, and you watch as Lee and Evelyn wait for the noise of the creatures, and then you hear something crawling on top of their house, which turns out to be just a false alarm of raccoons. But then the raccoons kind of walk off, and then one of these monsters grabs one of these raccoons and eats it. I thought it was really well done, just to set up the alarm and intensity of the situation that they're in. The story progresses as we watch the family seemingly go back to a normality, with Lee and Evelyn trying to provide a life as best as they can for their children. We also learn that Lee wants his children to learn how to take care of themselves, as Marcus, refusing to go fishing, is forced to by Lee, and Reagan being told to stay back with her mother. You can also see there's a strain in Reagan and Lee's relationship, which I believe plays into Reagan's guilt that she feels, thinking maybe her father blames her for Beau's death. On the way to fishing, Lee tries to teach Marcus that small sounds are safe, but big sounds are not safe unless there's another sound nearby that is louder, something like a river. He takes Marcus to a waterfall, and this is actually where we get our first bit of dialogue in the movie, as he shows Marcus that you can scream and talk near the waterfall because it masks the noise. Marcus also goes into asking Lee, does he blame Reagan for what happened to Beau? And Lee says no, but honestly, the body language is not convincing. Marcus explains then that Reagan blames herself. And you can see this throughout the movie just by Reagan's invertness, trying to be away from her family, the rebelliousness to authority. And she does blame herself. And during this conversation, it actually cuts to a scene where Reagan is visiting the grave site or grave mark for Beau, placing the rocket ship that ended her brother's life at the foot of it. One additional thing that I want to point out during this part of the movie, there's a part where Evelyn is pulling a very heavy bag up the stairs, causing a nail to be revealed. The bag kind of drags it out, which has consequences later. And I was like, I know where that's going. Nail right through the foot. No, thank you. On the way back to the farm, Marcus and Lee stumbles across an old man in the woods with a dead woman. The old man just starts screaming out of nowhere, and I really didn't understand the reason for the scene in the first watch, but on a rewatch, I think it's placed there to show the contrast of those who are trying to prepare for the future like the Abbotts, and those who just give up overall on humanity surviving. We are then brought to the climax of the movie. So, again, spoilers ahead for the ending. If you haven't seen A Quiet Place, mark it here, go watch it, and come back because there will be major spoilers for the ending. With not so perfect timing, as she is alone in their family home, Evelyn starts to go into labor. She heads down the stairs, and that's where that nail comes back into play, dropping the photo she had taken, shattering the frame, and she is unable to scream out loud. Upon switching the lights to red as to warn her family there is a creature nearby, and going up the stairs, she encounters one of the Death Angels type monsters on the hunt for the sound source. I can't imagine going into labor by yourself while you're being hunted by a monster that you know you have no advantage over winning. Terrifying. I'm just, yeah, terrifying. It's here where things get real dicey. Evelyn has to make her way to safety, hiding from the monster as it continues to hunt for her. What I love about this is it's not till the very end that we get a real close up of these creatures. It's only here where we're starting to see the real shape and texture of them. Yes, these are CGI monsters, or as they were called, Death Angels. John Krasinski played the monster in a motion capture suit, and as he said, I'm the one standing there in a way too tight of a suit, making little roaring noises at actors. I think this plays well as I am one for practical effects, but the CGI monsters in this actually look pretty good, especially since you don't really get a close up till the end. As Marcus and Lee makes their way to try to gather Evelyn and Reagan and bring them to safety, Evelyn is forced into a tub to give birth as quiet as possible. Marcus and Lee set off fireworks and were able to mask her screaming with said fireworks. Lee is able then to take Evelyn and their new child to an underground shelter under their farm, covering the sound within a close call of the baby starting to cry, placing the child in the makeshift box with the oxygen mask on them to mask their crying. Another creepy scene is Reagan, unable to hear through her broken hearing aid, having one of the monsters or death angels approach her from behind, only to be scared off by the frequency going off on her hearing aid, which gives us a hint how to destroy these monsters, which leads into the ending. At this point, we hear another part of dialogue. Evelyn and Lee discuss needing to find their children, learning they have a new son as they discuss the grief of Evelyn's guilt as she explained she should have carried Bo that day, but she couldn't because her hands were full. And who are they if they can't protect their children? She asks Lee to promise her that he will protect the other two. He leaves Evelyn and their new son to find his children as Reagan and Marcus find each other, trying to outsmart the creatures to survive in hopes of finding their parents. It's here where all hell breaks loose. Evelyn is woken up to not only the basement shelter being flooded, but she's not alone. There's one of these really creepy little death angels just hanging out. And there's a really creepy scene where it submerges itself and reemerges right in front of her as she's trying to safely and quietly get to her newborn's box. Now, there's a really good use of sound, and I would also say really good use of lighting this scene as well. My first watch through, I was on the edge of my seat the whole entire time. Now, Lee is able to find his children after a terrifying scene that they had being stuck in a corn silo with one of these death angels. And it's here where he sacrifices himself for his children, telling Reagan one last time that he loves her, always has loved her. And hopefully, this would help to leading to the end of her guilt of believing that everyone blames her for the death of her brother. It's also in this conclusion is where Reagan and Evelyn are able to figure out a way to defeat one of these death angels by heading into Lee's workstation, and where they have the frequency of the hearing aid to the mic overloading the monster, allowing it to open its head and give Evelyn the ability to shoot it in the head, killing it. This alerts the other monsters on the farm to head to its location, but now they have a real chance of survival as they team up to shoot one of these the same way. Honestly, A Quiet Place was a real surprise for me. Going into this movie, I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. I remember leaving the theater and my husband turning to me, who isn't really a big horror fan, telling me this is the first time in a long time that he's been on edge the entire movie. The use of sound is near perfect in this movie. It makes it feel so immersed. I love the different takes than the standard post apocalyptic movie where the Abbotts are trying to live a normal life, prepare their children for the future. And I like this. It's a different take than just rather seeing death and destruction all around them. I know this leads into a sequel, which I haven't seen yet, but I would say this is nearly a perfect movie. The use of the family's grief to push the narrative forward really allows the audience to have empathy for them right off the bat. I would give The Quiet Place a watch if you haven't. I'll be checking out the new one, Quiet Place Day 1, this week, which I hopefully will have a review out right afterwards, which I'm really excited to check out the lore and background story on the Death Angels. Hopefully, they'll give us a little bit more on that. So, thank you everyone for joining me on my breakdown of The Quiet Place. I hope you enjoyed it. Please hit that like and subscribe button. And until next time, stay spooky.